I'm sorry, I failed you.
Okay, so I'd like to call to order the February 9th, 2021 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Could we do roll call, Courtney?
Yeah. Josh Rabe,
Here.
Misty Solvich,
Here.
Joe Butler, Al Ferris,
Here.
Aaron Freeberg, Becky Needles,
Here. Just a moment, Erin.
Oh, yeah.
Connecting to audio.
Yeah. No.
Okay. Bob Ormsby,
Here.
Jeremy Preble,
Here.
and Sarah Ritchie.
Here.
All right, so has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? And could we have a motion to approve it?
This is Josh Rabe. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Do we have a second?
Jeremy Preble, I'll second it.
So then we just do a all in favor?
Yep, on those ones, that's
All
fine,
in
yeah.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
So agenda is approved. And then if you reviewed the January 12th, 2021 minutes, do we have any comments on that? Can we have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for January 12th, 2021.
Do we have a second?
Sarah Ritchie, second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Hi.
All right. Do we have any public comments to anything that isn't pertaining to an agenda item? If not, we just move on.
Right on.
All right, so new business. Item A is consider recommendation on request from Brad Ross for an amendment to chapter 165 regarding warehouses. Charlie?
Yeah, thank you. Really quick, just want to summarize everything that we have in the staff report. At its meeting on December 24th, the City Council did direct staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider a recommendation on a request that was received from Mr. Ross. The request was for an amendment to C2 Highway Commercial Zoning District to allow for warehouse uses. Really quick, just some background on this. Mr. Ross and I have had some conversations starting right around probably right before Thanksgiving and kind of going through the holidays on this. We initially had discussed what would take place on this property that Mr. Ross was proposing. Initially, we kind of flirted with the idea of possibly doing a rezoning. Decided that probably wasn't the best course of action because the only zoning district that allowed this type of use was industrial. And rezoning it to an industrial use would essentially create a spot zoning, which is illegal. And at the same time, from a staff standpoint, would not be in favor of an industrial zoning district along the highway corridor. So at that time, the information that we gave Mr. Ross was to seek a zoning amendment to see how the comp plan fit in with this, as well as kind of allowing staff to do the research to see how other cities handle this. So first of all, we took a look at the comprehensive plan on this. So we know the comprehensive plan just adopted elevating Genoa. It designates this area as a commercial use, future commercial use. Most of the areas in town that are zoned C2 highway commercial are shown as community mixed use or regional mixed use. Those uses allow a variety of things, but mainly more commercial and retail type uses. The designation does incorporate a lot of things. Those are included in the staff report. If we want to go over those in more detail, we can. But the current areas in town are, current areas in town in the current industrial park as well as planned industrial park on the west side of town are shown on the future land use map as industrial areas. And those industrial areas do include office and warehouse type buildings. So looking through that analysis again, we noted that the C2 Highway Commercial Zoning District, it does allow for storage warehouses. However, it allows for them as an accessory use in conjunction with a permitted use or structure. So for example, a storage warehouse that's directly related to a retail use on the same site. Mr. Ross is proposing a standalone warehouse facility that would not be associated with a permitted use allowed in the district. Such type of warehousing is currently only allowed in the M1 industrial and M2 industrial zoning districts. As you're aware, the property is on the southeast corner of West 2nd and South R Street. It is currently zoned C2 commercial. It should be noted that the proposed amendment does apply to all properties in the C2 zoning district, not just the subject property. Went through the other areas again, just kind of some of the history on that's in there. So Mr. Ross is proposing a warehouse type building that would include 6 bays, or excuse me, 7 bays total, 6 of them being 1,300 square feet in size, and one of them being a little bit larger at about 1,600 square feet. Each of these units would have 1 entrance door and 1 approximately 14-foot garage door. Mr. Ross is working with Color Building Systems on, and they did note similar types of facilities in the metro area that included Grimes and Waukee. However, we did want to note in a review of those locations, those facilities are located in industrial zoning districts in those cities. We did research 25 other cities in the Des Moines metro area to see what zoning district those cities allowed warehouse uses in, excuse me. Of the 25 surveyed, all but 1 allowed for warehouse uses in their industrial zoning district. For purposes of the research too, just as a note that the city, if the city had a business park type zoning district, this is pretty common in a lot of cities. If it had a business park or industrial park type zoning district, we considered that to be an industrial classification. So then we looked at warehouse uses allowed in the commercial zoning districts. And of the 25 cities that we surveyed, 12 of them allowed warehouse uses in commercial zoning districts. Of those 12, only 3 of those cities allowed them by right, which is what this request is, and those were Boone, Clive, and Winterset. 3 had regulations similar to Indianola where they allowed them as an accessory use. And then 4 of them allowed these type of uses through a special or conditional use permit process. There was 2 other cities that allowed for them in various other requirements, but won't get too far in depth on those. I think the biggest thing we wanted to point out was most of them allowed them similar to either what Indianola does or allowed them through a special use permit. So again, the warehouse uses are not associated with any allowed permitted use. They're only allowed in the city's industrial zoning district. The comprehensive plan does not envision warehouse uses in the commercial classifications, but it does envision such uses in the industrial classification. We did do a survey as part of the comp plan where the city was asked, citizens were asked a lot of questions on that. Some of the comments that we got back as it relates to community character, community character was the 3rd most important area for the city to focus on. Had a lot of comments that came back on that, and a lot of them had to do with the aesthetics of the town, more importantly, the aesthetics of the highway corridors. In 2010 is when the city adopted the zoning regulations or the site plan regulations to work on the aesthetics of buildings along the highway corridors. And I don't know if anybody here was on the planning commission at that time, but you probably got some background in when those were adopted and the reason for them. But essentially it was to create a more aesthetically pleasing highway corridor. We did also note with the Highway 92 project in this area, there was a lot of trees that were taken out when they created a larger highway there, when they went from the 2-lane to the 3-lane with a center turn lane. And as through the last year or so, we've been working with the DOT to get a lot of those trees reestablished kind of in this area, just a little bit to the west of this area. But again, just to add to the aesthetics of this corridor. So also as part of the FY21 work plan, we are working on development code update project. I just bring that up because that is something we were working on. And according to section 414.3 of Iowa Code, all codes shall be made in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So with that, our staff recommendation is alternative number 3, which is recommending no zoning regulation amendment be made because of what the comp plan designation is. However, if the commission were to want to consider possibly approving something like this, our recommendation at that point would be that we do it as part of a special use permit process that's similar to what other cities do, with identified criteria that would need to be met to protect the city's emphasis on enhancing the image, appearance, and aesthetics of the city's highway corridors. So brief summary on that. I know there was a lot there, a lot written in the staff report, but if there are any questions of me on any of this, I would be happy to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Ross, would you like to approach and give your name and address?
Brad Ross, 812 NS Court. The objective here is to have, and we use the warehouse, and I'm not sure what the appropriate term would be, but it would be a facility that would accommodate small businesses, where many small businesses today maybe have to go to Des Moines likely to get their goods and services for the day. And those companies that would appeal to this area, where you would have an area that they would get their goods of the day at, would be auto glass replacement companies, parking lot cleaning and painting companies, electrical wiring companies, carpet cleaners, fire and storm water restoration companies. So the idea would be is that a small business would have a storage area for their commodities that they would use throughout the day or the week or whatever that they could draw from. Likely would have a couple of vans or a couple of pickups for service purposes, and their employees would go there, get their goods and services of the day, go do their small business work for the community, and then come back the next day and reload again. So I'm very much in agreement with Charlie that I will do the aesthetics to make sure that it has appeal to the area. But yeah, I really don't know what term you give it other than a developmental area for a small business to work out of, so that they don't have to spend so much time commuting back and forth to other larger facilities or warehouses. So I'm available to answer any questions if people have them.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Ross?
Yeah, Misty, this is Josh. I have a quick question. This is kind of Charlie and Mr. Ross both here. I want to make sure you did go through a lot earlier, Charlie. Wouldn't this be an allowed use if there was a proper ratio of office to warehouse? Is that correct?
Yeah, so if there was an associated retail use with this, so using Mr. Ross's example, like for an auto glass storage, if it was an actual auto glass company that was operating off that site, possibly even doing some work on that site, but then also using the site to store items, that would be allowed. What's missing here, based off the proposal we've received, is there's not that retail component tied to it.
Charlie, what's that ratio that would have to happen?
There's no, the code doesn't give a ratio at all on that. I mean, it's just, it says it has to be accessory. So the warehouse use has to be accessory to a permitted use that's on there. So when we look at that, essentially we have to be able to define that warehouse use as accessory based off what accessory is defined at in our code. And essentially what it says is it has to be incidental and subordinate to the principal use.
And that was the Charlie, that was the, like, for instance, like the Vice construction that was sort of recently approved, that would fall into like that category, correct?
So that one's a little bit different, in those are actually considered more store, like self-service storage units. And that's what we classified that one as. Those are for, you know, more of the RV type storage and stuff like that, where somebody's renting a space and they're able to come and go into that space. It's not a storage type facility for a business that's looking to warehouse materials inside the building.
And one of the commissioners brought up a good example is the auto glass business. As we know, as consumers, we ask the auto glass company to come to where our vehicle is. So this customer base is likely having the hired small business come to them and service them. Yes, they could bring their vehicle in there and have auto glass repaired and replaced there, but I think more of the customer base that I'm appealing to would actually have the services taken to the consumer.
This is Al Ferris. Could I ask a question of Charlie?
Of course you can.
Oh, okay. Were neighboring property owners notified of this proposed or requested change?
Not in this particular location, no. So since it's an ordinance amendment, it applies to the entire C2 zoning district, not just this property. So because of that, we are not required then to notify surrounding property owners.
Okay, if this change were to be approved, what limits would there be on the size of any other storage building that could be built in C2?
And that's part of the discussion. If the commission wants to go that route, that's part of the discussion, but we have not proposed any of those particular regulations in our recommendation.
So let me ask that again. If the change were approved, would there be any limitation on the size of a storage building that could be built anywhere in C2?
So that would have to be something as part of your recommendation that you would place those type of criteria on there. You'll recall we have a lot of special use permits in the city, allowed special uses, I should say, that have special criteria tied with each one of them. So as part of that, we'd have to come up with some regulations on, if the commission wanted to see it, regulations on size, regulations on building materials, stuff like that, height, whatever that may be. But I mean, a straight, if you straight say, hey, we recommend approval of this, then no, that can't happen, because then it's just allowed by right. But what we're saying as part of our recommendation, first of all, we're saying, hey, we don't necessarily, the comp plan doesn't necessarily support the change. However, if you do want to look at it, we need to create regulations that still protect the aesthetics of the highway corridors. And whatever those particular regulations may be would be up for debate.
Thank you.
So Charlie, going kind of further with what you had talked about previously about an accessory use being allowed under the current zoning. And I guess kind of where Josh was going as well, if there was an office component, office type setup for a portion of it, it would technically be allowed.
Yeah, again, if the actual storage that's taking place can be defined as that accessory use on there, then it would be allowed.
So how would it be any different if a existing business that had that kind of setup, if they leased out space to other businesses?
Technically, I mean, for leasing space out to other businesses for warehousing purposes would not be allowed.
So if it was, they couldn't sublet part of their.
Yeah, by the zoning regulations, they would not be able to do that.
And so it would just be a process of if someone complained.
Yeah, we'd have to do an investigation, all of that normal stuff that goes along with any zoning complaint that we get, yes.
A couple other examples, and if the thought process is to include a small, what I would say a small office area, I wouldn't have any qualms with that. But other examples on here of people who have approached me that have an interest is residential and commercial installation. Well, they would be literally going to the homeowner or to the new build. And if they're a new and upcoming foaming company, That's where they would store their trucks at night, and then they deploy them in the morning to go do their job and return that day. Now, if it would be desired to have a small office building in there that everybody hung their keys up on and maybe put their daily log books in, that'd be great. But they really need the space for deploying of their commercial equipment, foundation repair guys, those types of things.
And really quick, I just want to clarify. So looking at, I just pulled up the definition of an accessory use, and accessory use means a use or structure subordinate to the principal use of the building or land on the same lot or parcel of ground in serving a purpose customarily incidental to the use of the principal building or use of land. So some big words in there, but regardless, just at first blush when I think about it, just a standalone office, and the example that Mr. Ross gave where somebody's hanging keys or has a filing cabinet in there just to keep paperwork, I'm not sure that would be subordinate to the principal use. I still think the principal use is warehousing. If anything, that office would be more accessory to the warehouse. Does that make sense? So we've got to kind of look at what is the primary use that's taking place. And if that primary use is still warehousing, and the accessory use then becomes, hey, we just have a small office in the back here that's accessory to the storage unit that's going on, that's where we're different. So again, then I go into what is the code trying to allow here? For example, and I'm just trying to think of one right off the top of my head, but like maybe a lawn equipment company. I know we have one of those in town, and they're storing lawnmowers in a building in the back. That is their warehouse type facility. But the principal use is the lawn, the actual sales that are taking place. So yeah, we've got to try to find what is that balance, what is the primary use, what's the accessory use. So kind of to answer your kind of where we're going here, and I just want to make sure we're clear. We got to make sure that the principal use that's taking place is that retail component, whatever it may be.
I think that lies the problem, I believe, on this particular project, because typically a sales component is the commercial component. That's the accessory use for the stored product, and that's not the case here. What I've seen time and time again with these type of buildings we're talking about is a sales office basically on the front of the building and the warehouses in the back. And just by its nature being a retail type of occupancy, it's usually very transparent, open, a lot of glass. It's they're done in a way that's attractive and kind of inviting piece of architecture that is kind of the lipstick on the building behind the pig behind. So it's I would agree, this to hang keys is not the primary, it's not the sales purpose of the building. And so I would agree with you, Charlie.
I think the thing that I'm trying to figure out is we have to acknowledge that, well, it makes sense to me that this would be typically in a industrial type area, but also acknowledging that the way businesses function in retail businesses aren't always a storefront, especially the world post-COVID, people wanting things to come to them and being supportive of businesses being able to thrive here in Indianola. At the same time, the aesthetic piece of it is so key. And so just trying to balance, the intention of the comprehensive plan is for a beautiful corridor for our city. The code was written at a time when businesses didn't behave in the way they do now. And so just trying to balance that.
Well, I think you make a very good point in that the aesthetics is the key part of it, I think, so that it doesn't look like a machinery building, and when it comes to mortaring, when it comes to glass doors that you enter the facility, I think that's a key part of being attracted to that. And I might just go through this list of the people who have expressed interest, because before doing this, I want to make sure that there's a need. No one wants to spend their hard-earned money for trial and error. And the companies that have expressed interest are the auto glass replacement, parking lot cleaning and painting, electrical wiring company, carpet cleaning, drain cleaning services, fire, smoke, and water restoration, residential and commercial installation, RV repair, food and grocery specialty distributors where you have a large warehouse truck or large truck brings in food items, and foundation repair. Those are all folks that take their goods and services to the public and perform a task that have expressed interest in having needs to fill their request to grow the community.
Brad, it doesn't sound like you're going to have a big enough building.
Yeah, but age is a little bit of that, and if I was 40, I'd probably do more, but I'm not, and this is something that I've recognized the need in the community and been approached by others because I own the property, and I see a need for the small business to have a way to get their goods and services into consumers' hands.
And I guess that was my kind of question, was is there a reason preventing you from putting this in an industrial area? And it's because you currently own the property?
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, Misty, this is Josh. I just want to jump back in here that I am just struggling with this one a little bit. I feel like if there was, say it's a 1,600 foot bay and there was 801 square feet of office or retail space, and it was truly secondary, that warehouse, it would make a lot more sense to me, having just gone through the comprehensive planning process and identifying what these C2 corridors are meant for. I agree, Mr. Ross, those are some tremendous service businesses that have need. I'm just not sure that our retail right office corridors is where they belong. And I'm struggling with that, just being honest for everyone else to hear.
I think that my biggest concern with it would be, you know, ensuring the aesthetics of the building for the area, but then also with the types of vehicles that would be going in and out, just, you know, how is parking? I mean, that's always such a key piece in C2 zoning for retail spaces. How does that fall into play with something like this?
And Brad, you might be able to help out with this one a little bit because we did look at this initially, kind of when I looked at everything. Let me pull up what the code says on warehouse uses, because I think we went based off what
spots. We say 6 spots.
Yeah, and I think it was 6 total spots, but I'm trying to remember the calculation on it. But let me pull, if I can get it here in a second.
But you're right, Misty, the world is changing on how we get our goods and service, particularly by COVID. And I think that, you know, this is a unique request. And as the world grows and other people try to survive and compete with the Amazons of the world, if they're going to do that, they're going to have a way to come and go and get their goods and services to the consumer.
Really quick, warehousing in the industrial zoning district, it's 4 spaces for the first 5,000 square feet and then 1 space for every additional 5,000 after that. So I believe that's where the 6 came in. And what's the total size of the building?
65 by 145.
I can't do that math in my head. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so that's a little under 10,000 square feet. So at that time, it would do it. I think initially when we were talking, maybe we were looking at building a little bit bigger than 10,000. So that's where we got the 6. So you're looking at probably 5 to 6 spaces, just depending on the size of the building.
And with a,
Uh,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I've seen in the schematic that we were sent the driveway would empty onto the street rather than onto the highway. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any parking on that street?
Yes.
On our street, yes.
Yes.
Yes, we
Well-
have problems with it constantly.
Yes.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because if there isn't adequate parking internal to the property and there's parking on the street, that's going to get really congested there because there are a lot of apartments out there, and at times there's a lot of traffic on that street.
Mhm.
So would that create a problem if there's, let's say an individual comes in his automobile to get his truck or service equipment and leaves the automobile parked on the street? Is that a possibility, or is that going to happen, or is that going to cause additional congestion on that street?
I think to answer your question, Al, where the driveway is proposed on the west side is parallel with the same driveway of Indy 66. So there would only be 2 available spots to the south of the property if it was to be on-street property.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I mean, and we can't really focus too much on the area, and I want to stress again, this affects the entire C2 district, but in this particular area, I know there's a lot of apartment uses over there, and we've seen a lot of spillover parking. We do get a lot of complaints on the amount of cars that are parked along there at times. Again, they're public spaces. It's a public street. Hard to really control what parks there. We do have regulations in place that state that you can't park for a certain amount of time or more than a certain amount of time. And if there's a car that's got issues, we can take care of it, stuff like that. But, the only other thing I would add is if the commission does want to go down the road of looking at this as a special use, we can definitely, as part of that process, look at other parking requirements as well too. So, and I think this site that we're looking at does kind of offer some room and some flexibility to put more in there if needed.
So when it's a request to amend the zoning of things that are allowed, and affecting all of it, I mean, I'm just trying to think, are there other areas that we would need to consider that someone might look at this particular type of use just because of the nature of the site of what we have?
You're talking like other zoning districts
No, other C2.
that aren't on a highway corridor?
Right.
There's a few here and there. For example, like the People's Bank Administration building that's getting built right now, that's on a C2 property because the C2 does go a little bit off Jefferson in that area. So it doesn't have the highway frontage, but you'll have a few examples like that, but there's not really too many areas in the city where C2 isn't at least somewhat adjacent to the highways. But that also being said, there are areas in the comp plan that show for future commercial uses where it isn't adjacent to a highway. One example I can think of is on Summercrest Hills. If Willowcrest ever gets extended back towards the trail there to the east, that's shown as a future commercial corridor. So that would even get a little bit off the highway. There's other areas in town too. So we want to look at that obviously and just think even in the future on that. Is right now most of it's along the highway. There might be areas that aren't along the highway, but those would all be new corridors. And I think at the same time, if the city's investing in a new arterial type corridor, we want to look at the aesthetics of that as well too. So I think if we were to go down that road of doing it like that, I think any of the aesthetics that we'd want to put on our main highway corridors are probably going to apply to any future commercial areas as well.
This is Josh again. I was hoping to actually bring up aesthetics from just C2 holistically. It looks like in the concept in front of us, this is a looks like a pre-engineered metal building. Maybe it's stick frame, I don't know, but there's a lot of metal there and not anything else. Is there a different concept that you're planning to bring forward to meet those aesthetics? Because right now this one, unless I'm missing something, I don't think it meets current standards. Is that correct?
And I hope that Weeb might be joining me with Pella Buildings, as he's done multiple ones. We've talked about this and he may be able to jump in. But when I think of aesthetics and when I think about appearance, what first comes to mind to me is the new building that was built on the D&D property on Highway 69, 65 South, that is on the east side of the road that you folks approved. And with that aesthetics, they took a metal building, they then put in windows, they put in the brick on it and gave it an appearance of a commercial type of welcoming building and not a farmstead building. And Charlie, you have the address on that.
Yeah, I can get you the address. Give me 1 second on that. That was, yeah, one of the D&D lots that everything was I don't know how involved the commission was, because that was a project that started right about the time I was here, or I had started here. But I know even on that one, initially they proposed just a straight metal type building, and we had to kind of push back on them and get the 100% on the highway side and the 30% on the two adjacent sides, which that building does meet. So, I mean, that's a good example of a building that does meet our current highway design guidelines. And I feel like I'm talking right now just so I can get to this address and get it to you. But give me 1 second.
Weeb, are you there with us on Zoom?
Yeah, I'm here. And the finishes are something we've been doing a lot of work on here recently. I mean, we've been doing these in more commercial areas. Like you said, it's kind of changing a little bit. So we're trying to get good, I guess we call them more of a contractor space where people are still working out of them and having a retail sense to them. But it's just, there's not very many options for people to be able to get actual equipment in and out of, whether it's bringing in inventory or getting it out. And as far as the highway side, we've got several different panels, whether it be a smooth panel with a concealed fastener that looks a little better from an architectural standpoint, or we've also been doing, masonry panels and different things there that just looks a little bit more commercial or a little bit more presenting there. There's, overhang options with like a little canopy for an entrance right where the walk doors are. And there's different ways we can add depth to these and make them look good and not look just like just a steel building.
I think it was a Wiggert family, wasn't it? Wiggert family that built that building down there.
McCoy's.
Or McCoy,
Yeah.
yes, you're correct. Yep, McCoy's built that building and they put in nice windows and put the.
Yep. If you, and I'm gonna screen share her real quick and I can show you what the building looks like. So that's the beacon picture of the building. Again, you can see the 100% brick on the highway side here, and then they've got 30% on this side and actually 30% on the back side, which you can't see here. But that is a building that meets our current highway design standards.
And that does have a component. It is a space on the front of this building, has depth to it.
Mhm.
So I caution about this idea of just sticking a nice facade on a metal building. To me, that's not the same thing. You don't apply a front to a metal building, and make it look nice, and it's only 2 feet deep. That's my concern.
This is Al again. A question: if we were to go with your recommendation number 4 or option number 4, I would assume then a whole set of standards would have to be developed in order to accommodate that. Is that true?
Yeah, yes, I think that's appropriate. Ultimately, if that's the way the commission wants to go, we have the option of going through that tonight if you want. The other option would be to essentially push this back and have us kind of come up with those standards and bring it back next month. But those would be your 2 options if ultimately we're looking to go down that path.
And that's different than the special use permit?
No,
Yeah.
that's what it would be. It would
That
be,
is
I
the-
mean,
okay.
so
Just
that
reading
part of the
it.
recommendation states that if we are going to do it, we need to do it as a special use permit, and then we need to develop specific criteria to make sure we're protecting the highway corridors. Because I think in that sense, we're still meeting the comprehensive plan. I still stick with the original recommendation because of the comp plan, because the comp plan does specifically state that these should be more industrial areas. But when we're looking at the aesthetic portion of the comp plan, if we do want to go down this path, I just stress that we need to protect the aesthetics of the highway corridor.
So Charlie, just to confirm, if the decision would be move forward and then set that criteria, that's going to apply to anything in a C2, not just this project.
Yes, correct.
And likewise, if we were to approve the request, that would apply to all of C2 also, not just this project. So it would allow basically anything in C2, any kind of a warehouse in C2, anywhere in C2.
Yes. Yes.
And that doesn't fit the highway corridor beautification, quote, beautification, and does not fit the comprehensive plan.
Excuse me, correct, yes.
So as I said early on, I was struggling with that word warehouse, and I really don't have a word. Is there another word that could be used here that is meeting the needs of retail, but customers different than a restaurant or different than a hardware store that are not coming in on a daily basis buying goods and services off shelf? Is there another name?
I mean, I didn't look too in depth on that one. I just know based off what our code has currently, it's either a self-storage unit or it's a warehouse. And the discussion that we had on the self-storage unit was it's not that, because essentially this isn't something like your traditional storage units that you're seeing out there,
So
that code was built to. So is there another name that you come up with? I don't know, because to me, it definitely fits the warehouse definition because you're warehousing materials. If there's another term, and I can kind of actually ask the commission maybe a little bit, and because we have 9 other people here that maybe can help me, but I can't think of one right at the top of my head. Just to me, it really does fit that warehousing definition.
So is there the option for this to be self-storage, where you're self-storing the goods and services you're using during the day?
Yeah, it just, the self-storage units in our code kind of are built around what those traditional units are. So I'm thinking the ones out in Hillcrest, there's a couple of those. I know there's a few on East 92 as well. Those to me are kind of your traditional storage units where you're renting it for a month or something like that. I don't want to get too hung up on the actual terms of the rental, but to me, this is not really meeting that definition. I know we looked at that initially to kind of see if it would, but I just think there's too many differences between the two.
Well, and I guess I was trying to think, because the building looks like a supersized version of that, but the use is so different in that a self-storage unit, it's not people coming in and out of it, a single unit by nature as often.
Yeah.
It's really a warehouse, in my opinion. It's no different than a
I think
warehouse. It stores product that you distribute, take out, bring in.
But you think about like the auto glass repair idea. If that's one of the businesses that is housing their retail there and people can bring their cars to be serviced there, then it's not a traditional warehouse either. So Brad, I have a question. If that's the kind of the thought process that these would be multiple businesses housing their business in here, how many businesses would you anticipate would occupy the space if it was full?
7. Of which 6 of them would be 1,300 square feet, and because of the lot size and the building size, one of them would be 1,625.
This is Al again. Sarah raises an interesting thing there. And help me out here, Charlie. The businesses, let's say this auto glass repair, they would not be allowed to do auto glass repair on site there, would they? Because then they're an auto glass repair business.
Yeah, I'd have
And then
to,
they're a garage.
yeah, you'd have to give me a little bit of time just to research exactly how auto glass business would fall into the C2 zoning district. So if you want, I can do that now. But yeah, ultimately what I'll tell you is it would just have to fit into whatever use that falls into. If it's auto repair services, I know we do allow for auto repair services in the C2 zoning district. So if that would be classified as that, it could fit possibly. But then again, auto repair services also have more conditional standards that have to be met too. So I'm positive we don't outright say auto glass repair company in our code anywhere, so we'd have to try to find what use that fit into appropriately.
Just so we understand correctly, at least when Brad described it, these garages are just storing material that people are picking up. There's no services going on in there. Nobody's repairing anything in these buildings that I know of. At least that's the way it was described. You're not going there and getting your windshield fixed. You're just picking up the material to take somewhere where your car is and getting it fixed there.
Yeah, because that's today's business model is they get the glass from a central depot and then come to your driveway or come to your workplace and replace that. If you want to use the example of the windshield companies, you're absolutely right. I mean, they could. I mean, I posed the question when they'd ask about retail space. I posed the question that if somebody wanted to bring their car there, that they could get the windshield replaced. But I don't think that's what the consumer wants.
If every one of the occupants of those 7 spaces wanted to do that, there wouldn't be enough parking, would there?
Enough parking for the customer would drive into the physical building itself.
So I think that's where it would have to go the route of the special use permit, that there'd be specific restrictions that it couldn't be used for retail uses, because that would change the parking requirements then. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably. Thinking out loud here, we could possibly write something in there if there was a retail component on it. The only issue I see with that is just the fluctuation of this. It could be an auto glass repair service for a year, and then if the lease is up, then it's something else, and now we have excess parking or not enough parking, and it's just hard to determine that.
Yeah.
So if we were going to go down that road, you'd have to build in regulations that either outright said you can do it or can't do it. And if you could do it, you would have to anticipate that every single unit would have that retail component and then calculate parking off that.
And these aren't heated cooled spaces, are they?
I was not planning on it, no. My objective is to well insulate the building, because the components in there really are not going to be subject to extreme cold.
Right.
So then I think we bring up an interesting point here, Charlie. How are we going to regulate each business that goes in there and how they're using it and all that? It's not like you're pulling a permit from each one. You're creating.
Yeah, we can't. I mean, we're not going to pull a permit on each one. We don't have any type of business licensing that we're tracking with that. So yeah, tracking it would be difficult to say the least. I mean, initially you could get information, but as the years go on, having that information would be difficult. And Mr. Ross can say that he might be able to provide that information, but obviously properties get sold at times too. And one of the things that I always do is kind of think, 10 to 20 years down the road, how is everybody handling the same situation? So it's difficult. It would be difficult. And I think that's why we fall back on, from my standpoint, that it's a warehouse use and it needs to be treated as a warehouse use, because ultimately that's what's going to be happening.
Any further comments? Questions?
Real quick, Charlie, the business that you brought up that's south of town on 92, can you remind me what they do in that? Is that a single business?
Yeah, it's a single property owner, and I know that there was some sort of antique car display that Mr. McCoy was planning on doing, is doing. I really don't know to be 100% sure. And I can't recall what the balance of it was for. I might be able to find that information if you give me just a second, but again, it's just something that, what's the address here? Give me 1 second. I'll see if I can pull that permit up and see if it was clarified to what it was. It'll take me a little bit to get it here, so if there's more
Okay.
questions.
So
let's
the other thing I
that.
thought might be valuable, and maybe you can just pivot and we can kind of answer that one at a later time, but it might be good for us to pull up our map of our C2 zones to really kind of think about what the impact is. If we would approve this, and it would approve it with as special permits, but what does that look like truly if we blew that up in the C2 zones?
Give me 1 second here, because I can do that one really
Okay.
quick here with this. And I will, once we get it up here, try to zoom out to the, so kind of a more full scale of the city. It's hard to see, but these red areas, you've got one here at R63 and 92. These red areas along the highway are C2. This is a pink area here that's around the square. That's more of the C3 zoning district, but then again, C2 going up here. And then as you get up towards the, well, and it also goes down 92 a little bit in some areas here and south of town as well. We get north of town, and that's where a lot of the C2 starts expanding a little bit in the Summercrest Hills area that I mentioned. This is where Willow Crest would eventually go through in this area right here, and that's where that C2 zoning district's in place. So again, as you can see, for the most part, it's adjacent to the highway corridors.
Yeah.
And I'm struggling to get my permits to open up here, see if I could see that old one here. So I might not be able to do that tonight and find out what
That's
uses
okay.
are in that property there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the seeing the map really shows us what the magnitude could potentially be.
Is the chair ready for a motion?
Yes, entertain a motion.
I would move that we recommend number 3, no zoning change, or no change to the ordinance of zoning as it's put in possibility number 3 in our items.
I'll second. Jeremy Pribble, I'll second.
And so I have my own question, comment, I guess.
Yep. So you've got a motion in a second. You can have discussion at this point.
Okay,
That's appropriate.
And so I am curious what the disadvantage of the special use permit process would be.
I think it sets a precedent. Now with other C2 areas and people want to do the same thing, we're going to be setting a precedent to allow that to happen. So you have inconsistency in the visual and functional use of the zoning district.
This also is like again, that we talked about the comprehensive plan. This is in line for the future use. I mean, I think it was a good point you brought up too, as far as like, I think we always have to re-examine that and take considerations like what's going on with COVID. But again, I think, time will tell with that sort of stuff. And there'll be other precedents that'll kind of be set with that stuff. I don't think that, I don't know if this is something that we would tackle as a precedent right now for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the purpose of the special use, isn't it? But out of the communities, what's typical in communities, around half of them, that's how they went through this. They would consider something like this.
There was about half of them that allowed for them in commercial zoning districts, and of those about half of them did it through a special use permit, and then there was various other things, either special use or some sort of conditions that were associated with it.
So I do think that needs to be a consideration. It's not like this is an outlier situation that's come to Indianola, and so we need to really fiercely protect that. I mean, I think it is something that it's not that other communities are open to it, and of that, half of them, like you said, the special permit use. So that's I guess that's my only concern, is just as businesses change, is there a reason why we would shut down a pathway to do it under specific circumstances? Not thinking of even specifically this proposal, but any proposal similar.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, I hear everything you're saying, Misty. My connection got bad there for a second. I wanted to make sure I heard this motion correctly. He made a motion for option 3, which a yes vote would be a vote for no zoning change. And what would a no vote be for?
The motion, so I'll repeat it real quick. The motion was for option 3 to not recommend a change. So a yes vote would be to not recommend a change. A no vote would essentially disagree with that motion, and then we can go back to the floor if there's another motion to be made after that. But a no vote isn't approving the request. It's just essentially at that point saying nothing happens. Nothing happens with your decision, your recommendation. There would be no recommendation, so we'd want to go back then and see if there's another motion.
Thank you. My fiber wasn't very fibery for a minute. I appreciate it. I don't know what's going on.
Any further discussion, or are we ready for a vote?
Ready?
Courtney?
Al Ferris,
I vote yes, which is to deny the request.
Aaron Freeberg,
Yes.
Becky Needles,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby,
Yes.
Jeremy Preble,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Josh Rabe,
Yes.
Misty Soldwich.
No. All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rob. So next item on the agenda, are there any comments?
Really quick from staff, the current project updates included, the building permit report for January is included. Pretty typical for January, not too much activity. Probably worth noting though that we did have 4 single family permits issued for a total valuation of 1.5 million. So we've got some pretty high-end housing in this month of January. Current projects, any questions on that? Few new things that are on there this month. Dollar General has pulled a permit to finish space in the old Hibbets building across the street here, and All Creatures Small is looking to do an expansion of their veterinary clinic there next to the activity center on the Second Avenue. So any particular questions on any of those, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are we having two Dollar Generals or is Dollar General moving?
I think that's the $1 million question. I don't know for sure. I haven't gotten that information. We had been working with the property owner a little bit on the building there on West Second Avenue. I can't give specifics because I don't remember them, but I know Dollar General's lease on that building had some time left, and by time I mean it was over a year. So I would imagine we'd have two for a period of time. What happens once that lease expires, I do not know, but that's just my assumption at this point. That's not any inside information. I really don't know the answer to that.
That'll be handy for everyone working here at City Hall.
Yes, I can't wait.
You can get some snacks. That's right. A quick birthday gift. So we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Sarah Ritchie.
We have a second?
I'll second Bob Ormsby.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Aye.
Have a
Take
good
care,
night.
everybody.
See y'all. Stay safe.
Okay. See you in March.